Today we're going to talk about Gittin, divorce, and first we're going to talk about the vast majority of divorce cases I'm going to talk about Chutz La'aretz, not about Eretz Yisrael, are relatively simple. One of the two parties calls you up, sometimes a lawyer will, and say, we're getting divorced, we want this, and you call up the other party and you schedule a time, they both come in, and you do a get. Now, I am going to go very, very briefly through what we do in a get. First, we verify what all the names and nicknames of the two people are and what their fathers' names and nicknames are. All right, we write all of those things in the get. Then we ask the husband if he wants to give the get of his own free will without condition or compulsion. He says yes, or maybe not. But we're not going to deal with that right now. And then we ask if he made any vows or oaths or agreement to give this get or not to give this get. And he will either say yes or no. And then we say, maybe you did make an agreement or vow or oath or whatever, and you forgot about it, so we will release you from it. So we then do a hataras nadarim. We release them from any vows or oaths or agreements that would require them or prohibit them from giving the get. Then we ask them if they ever made a statement that could damage the power of the get to divorce their wife, or a statement that derives from a statement. What this means is as follows. There are certain circumstances. You've played telephone as a child? Do you know the name of the game in Hebrew, by the way?
Telephone?
No, telephone shavur, a broken telephone.
Well, it's called in English as well.
Call it broken telephone?
Yeah, broken telephone.
No, I only remember it as telephone.
It's broken now.
Yeah.
Right, you take a message, it goes around, and it's something different by the time you get it.
Yeah.
So too, if the husband would say something, it's in shul in the morning before and he says, I'm going to Beit Din today. The person interprets it that he's going, but he doesn't really want to give the get to his wife, and then and it comes out as a statement that would invalidate the get. That could be problematic. So therefore, like the last will and testament, the last person thing he says stands, so we have him recite a formula where he negates all previous statements, right? Just like in the last will and testament, you say this is superseding all previous wills. Then he orders, if it's a get being sent to someone else, he tells the shaliach that he's going to appoint this sofer and these aidim to write and sign the get, and he's appointing the shaliach to take the get to his wife. And then he appoints the sofer to write the get, and he appoints the aidim to sign the get, and they do it. There are formulas to guarantee that you're doing all this properly and the whole thing. Then we examine the sofer and the aidim to make sure, and maybe the shaliach, to make sure it was done properly. And then we ask the woman whether she is receiving the get of her own free will without condition of compulsion, and whether she has made any vows or oaths or agreements, etc. And then the get is handed by the man to the woman. At the point that he hands it to her, it becomes her property and they are divorced. That is every step of the process of a get boiled down to, let us say, 3 minutes. The process, if you know what you're doing from start to finish, and you have a sofer that's reasonably fast, it used to take me when I had aidim that knew what they were used to signing in Los Angeles, an hour and 15 minutes. Sometimes when I had to be other places where I had to instruct the aidim letter by letter how to sign their names, because it has to be signed in the same script that we use in the Sefer Torah. So sometimes it could take hour and a half, hour, 45 minutes, depending on how long their names were. In Arizona, there was one guy who I regularly used as an aide. First of all, he would get me another aide and everything else as well, but his name was Dan Ben Avraham, and he also had some training as a sofer. So, it's like, as opposed to Menachem Mendel Ben Yosef Yitzhak. But that's the basic way that a get is done. Now, I am going to take a step far back to the first time I was in Israel was when I was in high school. I was in Eretz Yisrael for a month, and I spent almost the entire time in Yerushalayim, and I made it my business to go hear shirim from as many gedolim as I could. And one of the shirim I heard was from Masas, who was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. Before that, he was the chief rabbi of Morocco. And at the end of the shir, he said he's not going to take very many questions tonight, today, because he didn't sleep last night. So the first question, of course, is, why didn't the Rav sleep last night? He said, well, I had a shaila on the naguna, a woman who's chained, can't get married, and it took me all night to work out a heter for her. So someone says, the Rav could have slept, been fresher in the morning, to have taken you less time to work out the solution. And he says, if it were my daughter, this is what I would have done. Years later, 300 years ago, the chief rabbi of Morocco was Rav Chaim Falaji, and he has Shailas and Chuvas Chaim V'Shail, and the first tshuva in Even Ha'ezer is a shaila on an aguna. And he asks a question in his introduction to the tshuva that is not actually a question. He's only asking the question so he can give the answer. The question is, why are Benos Yisrael called Benos Yisrael and not Neshei Yisrael? Now it's obvious. If it's Bnei Yisrael, it's Benos Yisrael, right? I mean, it's not a real question. We don't say Anshe Yisrael, so why would we say Neshei Yisrael? It's not a question. But he says the reason is so that every time a Rav has a shaila of a naguna, he looks at her as if she were his own daughter that came out of his loins, and therefore he will use all of the abilities that he has to find a solution for her problem. All right? Obviously, Rav Masas was aware of the tshuva. Right? He didn't cite it, but he was aware of the tshuva, and that is the way he related to this problem. When I was a young Dayan, let us say this is, 35 years ago, the Beit Din converted the woman, and after a while she got married. 6 months after she was married, her husband had a stroke at the Shabbos table and was in a coma for 6 months. He came out of the coma and was a triplegic and would remain a triplegic for the rest of his life. What? Triplegic. Can't move both legs and one arm. You have limited control over one arm. And he had limited abilities of speech at the time. And we told her, the Rosh Beit Din at the time, that was my position, told her at the time that we should arrange a get because he's going to be this way his whole life and this isn't a life for you. But emotionally she couldn't conceive of abandoning him at that point. Several years later, 5, 6, 7 years later, I don't remember exactly, but in that ballpark, she did want to get divorced, except his power of speech had declined to the point where he could only say the word no, but he said it in two ways, one meaning yes and one meaning no. One of the basic rules of Gittin, by the way, is that you have to hear the husband ordering you to write, sign, and deliver the get, right? You can't use an interpreter. So, but the only people that could tell the difference of how he said no was his family and the medical team that took care of him. So this is one problem. There was the Av Beit Din, the Litvisher Beit Din in Los Angeles, visited him and determined that he was Lav Bardas, he's not competent, and therefore he cannot give a get. The Chelkas Mechokes, one of the primary commentators in Even Ha'ezer, says that as soon as it's been determined that someone is incompetent, ein niskakin lo od, we never re-examine this issue. Meaning once they've been declared incompetent, they're just incompetent until they're 100% competent. At that point, Rav Aaron Tendler, one of Ramesh's grandsons, called me up. He knew the woman, he knew the woman's rabbi. He called me up about this, and we had a meeting, and I didn't know what it was about until I got there. And I said, well, first of all, I would have no ability, I would have no way of determining whether this person is competent or not. But let me send two firm ex-Jewish experts in this type of psychological situation to examine him and give me a written opinion whether he's competent or not, whether he knows what Gittin and Kiddushin are.
Even though it can't be re-examined?
But if someone is incompetent to approve of a get, it's almost as if they're dead already.
But they're not. They're living. That's a problem. And he does communicate with people. It's just most people can't understand what he's saying. And I said, I will do a get, and I have no idea whether, if they say that he's competent, I'll do a get. There's a tshuva from Ramesha, by the way, dealing with the interpreter question. The London Beit Din asked a question. A Persian man who didn't speak any English wanted to divorce his wife. He came into the London Beit Din with someone a Persian that spoke English to translate for him. And they asked Ramesha whether it's possible to use this translator. Even the Gemara says you can't use a translator. And Ramesha had several reasons to argue that since he himself had brought the translator and he was coming to the Beit Din himself, that there was reason to believe that he wanted to give the get to his wife, and so we could allow the translation. So I said I can string a series of things together. I have no idea whether the get will be kosher or not, but after I've done the get, I'll go there to Israel and ask the Gedolim there. So we did the get, and several days later, I came to Israel, and at the time, Rabbi Avram Shapiro Zitzel, former chief rabbi of the state of Israel, was ill and not seeing people, but I had a good friend who was a nephew of his who arranged a meeting for me. He took me to the meeting, and when I had three shaylas to ask Rabbi Avram at the time, and this was the one of them. And when I asked him the shayla, he started, as you say in Hebrew, Natan li ala rosh. He started beating me up over it. He said, איך אתה לא הרגשת את הצער ועגמת נפש של אישה כל רגע שהיא לא יודעת אם היא מגורשת? How can you not feel the pain and suffering of the woman every minute that she doesn't know that she's divorced or not? How could you be so irresponsible not to give her a Maseh Beit Din miyad? I tried to explain all the different, he knew what they are, of course, but all the different questions they had in this case, and he wouldn't take any of it, and he just beat me up over it for 45 minutes. And it made a huge impression on me as to almost everyone that comes to a Beit Din, ignoring monetary disputes for a moment, something is bothering them. But with people getting divorced, something's bothering them. No one getting divorced is in a good place, let us say, right? People converting, something is bothering them. And ideally, they have a driving passion to be Jewish and they feel pain that they are not Jewish, right? And there can be other things as well, but there is something, right, that is very difficult for the person. And one of the responsibilities, not only of a Dayan, but of any Jewish person, is to feel what that person is going through. idea of Ahavas Yisrael means that we have to love every Jew, no matter what is going on with them, right? And feel what their sufferings are, which will bring me to the next thing I want to say in terms of dealing with the famous thing of someone refusing to give or receive a get. It's a ratio of about 10 to 1, I would say. There are 10 times as many men that refuse to give a get as women that refuse to receive a get. There it is always, ignoring mental illness, we'll deal with that later. But there is something paining the person that is causing them not to cooperate, all right? And if you approach the person not as you're a horrible person because you don't want to give your wife a get, and so therefore we're going to have protests in front of your house and your business, and we're going to do this and this and this and that, right? That doesn't solve problems. Might make the people protesting feel better, might make the refused party feel better, right? But it doesn't, in fact, solve the problem. If you go to the person and your intent is to help that person get over their problems. I once described it. This is something Rabbi Druckman told me, but I once described it to a Rav as it's like peeling an onion. You take off one layer after another until you get to the root of the problem. You deal with the problem, and then the person cooperates. I have dealt with close to 500 cases of get refusal and been able to solve better than 98%. But it takes time. Now, there are people that are mentally ill or have other issues where no approach will work, but in my experience, those are very rare. And you can almost always find a heter that invalidates the marriage in one way or another.
Does that mean a lot of marriages are not technically valid?
I'm going to stop with the first part now, and in the second part we're going to discuss cases of invalidating the marriage or
Catch a witness breaking Shabbos.